Good morning and peace be upon you wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Qasim Rashid, and this is the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. My friends, thank you for tuning in. I love your emails, your texts, your tweets. I don't know what the new term is for Blue Sky, but if you're on Blue Sky, make sure you follow me on there. I'm really enjoying the environment. It feels like what Twitter was a decade ago, before all the Nazis and the white supremacists and the fascists came on board. A positive environment. You just look at a couple of knuckleheads, which was, the same as what Twitter always was, but definitely find me on Blue Sky as well. We got a great show lined up. I want to do a deep dive on a couple of things. Before we get into the main body of the show, I'm going to play a clip. I went on right-wing media, British right-wing media, to talk about Joe Biden and him pardoning his son, Hunter. And I think that it actually went pretty well for me. It did not go as well as they expected. At one point, they make a statement that I wasn't familiar with. And I'm not the kind of guy who's just gonna, try to BS an answer when I just don't know the answer. They claim that the New York State changed the statute of limitations to allow them to prosecute Trump. That the statute of limitations to prosecute him for his crimes, his fraud, which he was convicted on 34 counts, that had expired. And then retroactively, they went and changed the law. Now, obviously, this would be called an ex post facto law. It's illegal. It's banned. You can't, you can't criminalize something after the fact, right? Or you can't extend a statute of limitations after the fact. And so I didn't know what the guy was talking about, so I just said I'm not familiar with it. But when I come back from break, I'll explain what the actual situation was. And this is going to tee up the broader conversation because there's just not enough conversation around the actual issues with Biden pardoning his son. For the record, I probably would have done the same thing. I will never be in that situation, but I can see why Joe Biden made the decision he made. And the people attacking him for that, I think they're just being intellectually dishonest. And that's the nicest way I can put it. But that said, what bothers me even more is that there are other serious and major issues with Biden pardoning his son. And we need to talk about them because it harms all of us. Yes, including you. And it harms you in pretty catastrophic ways. Media isn't talking about it. Corporate media won't address it. Politicians won't touch it because if they do, they're going to be acknowledging their own role in being complicit in these injustices. And so we'll do a deeper dive, but let me go to this clip. It's a little bit over 5 minutes long. It's on a British right-wing TV station, and then we'll come back right after that.
Well, delighted to be joined now by the former Democratic nominee for US Congress, Qasim Rashid. Qasim, is this what's going on in the United States? Political prosecutions from either side of the aisle?
Well, thanks for having me. And I think if you look at the initial charges filed against Hunter Biden, and they were basically at a plea deal, every U.S. attorney would tell you that this is not enough to pursue. It was pretty clear they're going after him as a way to attack Joe Biden. And frankly, I don't know why Biden waited. I don't know why he even made this promise that he would never intervene or interfere when I think we all knew that he would. And so I'm actually glad that he has. And I think that when you try to equivocate between him and Trump, you see two very different scenarios. We see a scenario in Biden protecting his son from what's pretty clear prosecution, malicious prosecution. And we see somebody in Trump who himself has, pardoned overt white supremacists and war criminals and people convicted of war crimes by military tribunals. And so, the comparison between the two doesn't really make any sense to me, but that's what we've come to see.
Why in the case of Hunter Biden is it blatant political persecution?
Prosecution. I think if you look at I think if you look at the actual charges and the fact that they were near a plea deal, and you compare it to countless other similar cases around the country, you won't find a single other example of any U.S. attorney or any federal prosecutor seeking those kinds of a 17-year punishment for what Hunter Biden is guilty of, and he absolutely is guilty of that. So it's pretty clear that he's being singled out, and this is not a qualitative opinion, you can actually compare the other cases and find that nobody else is being prosecuted at this level of mendacity as Hunter Biden is. And so I think Joe Biden did what a father would do in that situation, and that is protect his son from malicious prosecution.
Could you not make the case that the New York case against Donald Trump, the Stormy Daniels case about borrowed money and whether it was correctly classified as such, I mean, could you not make the case that that was clearly a political prosecution brought forward by political enemies of Donald Trump, and perhaps Democrats would have been better off if the New York case had never happened and only sticking to the Florida and the Georgia cases?
No, I'm so glad you brought up those cases because, again, those are examples where we can compare the crimes committed by Donald Trump to that of Hunter Biden. And what Hunter Biden did is stupid and in my view, deserves punishment. But with Donald Trump, the tax fraud that he committed, the election fraud that he committed, actually harmed hundreds of millions of people, actually caused tangible harm. And that's harm for which other people have gone to prison. And so I want to make that very clear distinction, that where I just pointed out that you don't really find examples of people going to prison for 17 years for what Hunter Biden did. You absolutely find example after example after example of people going to prison for what Donald Trump did and was convicted of on all 34 counts by a jury of his peers. So no, I don't think there is much of a comparison. I think we see two very different scenarios and two very consistent standards of justice applied equally to Donald Trump as to other people.
In New York, they literally changed the law to adjust the statute of limitations so that this case could be brought against Donald Trump. I mean, that's not equal justice.
I'm not familiar with how they adjusted the statute of limitations, so I don't want to speak about something that I don't have knowledge of. But again, the beauty of this country is you have due process of law. You had the opportunity to plea bargain out. Donald Trump had access to all the money and lawyers in the world. And 34 counts, a jury of his peers convicted him. But I want to make one point really, really clear for the American people here, and just for people in general. If the actual outrage is pardoning a family member, Charles Kushner, who is the father of Donald Trump's son-in-law, was convicted by a Republican AG of major fraud. Chris Christie called it one of the most grotesque prosecutions he's ever had because of the severity of the crimes. Donald Trump pardoned him and gave him an appointment to France as the ambassador. And then we talk, Clint Lawrence, Matthew Goldstein, I think is his name, Eddie Gallagher, all men in the military who murdered innocent civilians. Their own fellow soldiers testified against them and got them convicted of war crimes for murdering innocent people, and Donald Trump pardoned them. And so it's rich for me to hear Republicans or anyone criticize Joe Biden pardoning his son for a crime.
Yeah, but it's not that. It's not just that, though, is it? It's that he promised that he wouldn't.
Crimes that were violated by Donald Trump.
Is that he promised that he wouldn't? He stood there in front of the American people and said, "I'm not going to pardon my son." And then what does he do? He pardons his son. Is it not just the fact he lied?
I completely, that's what I led my comments with. That I don't understand why he even bothered saying that he wouldn't pardon his son. I think that was silly and short-sighted. And I think that if you want to criticize him for saying that I'm not going to do it and then doing it, criticize him. And I think that was a dumb thing that he did, and he should be criticized for that.
OK, well, Qasim Rashid, former Democratic nominee for the US Congress, thanks so much for joining us here on Good Afternoon Britain.
All right. So if you listen to that clip, you can see they were probably expecting to roll over or expecting me to roll over, and I did not. I took them to task. But that one point they made about the state of New York changing its laws so they could prosecute Trump, I looked that up, and these guys lied through their teeth. Like, they flat out lied. And I'm upset at myself for not having the receipts handy in real time to shut them down. Because if you know one thing about me, it's I like to come prepared with my arguments and my research, and I like to have receipts handy. And a lot of those receipts I did have handy. But this one I wasn't aware of. And so I researched and found out what the hell happened with the statute of limitations. And it actually had nothing to do with Donald Trump. It had everything to do with COVID. Obviously, due to COVID, things were shut down. You might remember that if you're more than 4 years old, that things were shut down. Everything from every courtroom scenario was shut down as well. And so therefore, people who had been wronged and had been denied justice or had suffered some kind of a contractual violation, they weren't able to have their case heard or file their lawsuit within the statute of limitations because the court wasn't open. The courts just weren't accepting lawsuits. And so the state passed legislation extending the statute of limitations for certain civil matters, allowing people who are, unjustly harmed the adequate time that they would have had if COVID never existed. And so to be clear, they didn't make up a new statute of limitations. They didn't target Donald Trump. They didn't arbitrarily decide, we're just going to let you sue him whatever the hell you want for whatever the hell reason you want. No, they said COVID-19 has prevented people from attaining the basic justice they need because the courts aren't open. So that time that they were denied, we're simply going to attach to the original statute of limitations so that they have the same amount of time as they would have had otherwise. And it was under that extension that was in actuality a revalidation of the original statute of limitations that allowed the state to prosecute Trump. And this argument that it was extended to target Trump was presented to judge after judge, and they all rejected it and said, no, you're insane. No one's targeting Trump by extending the statute of limitations. We're targeting him within the original statute of limitations that would have happened if COVID had not existed. And so this, kind of sleight of hand, disinformation in media is so devastating because I consider myself pretty informed on these issues. And if I'm not aware of it, look, I may not be the world's smartest person, but I go into these situations trying to have a comprehensive picture of what I'm talking about. And if that was something I was not aware of, you think the average Trump supporter is going to care? No, they're going to see him as a martyr. They're going to see him being persecuted. They're going to see him as being a target for this, this deep state, the swamp. And so that's why it's so critical that we stay engaged. And that's why I want you guys to stay engaged and involved and stay empowered with this information. And if you're listening on Substack, hit that subscribe button because your support allows me to continue to do this painstaking research. Right now, I'm a one-person show with the exception of my amazing producer, Alexa, who does the hard work of producing this show and making it palatable and making it awesome, actually. But all the writing and research I do, it's a one-person show. And that's where I need your support to help expand and grow this team. Hit that subscribe button. When we come back from break, I'm going to do a deep dive into the serious media and political failures around the Joe Biden pardon of Hunter Biden. And I promise you, it's not going to be a 30-minute rant about how it's unfair that Hunter Biden got pardoned. I promise you that's not the issue. I actually, like I said, I actually understand and agree why Joe Biden did what he did. But we cannot get stuck on that as the issue because there's a much bigger play here that we're missing. And there's a much bigger injustice being perpetuated that Joe Biden can stop, and we need to ensure he stops it. Because if he doesn't, it's going to be devastating to millions of Americans. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. I wanted to start this with a dad joke. I've been diagnosed with a rare condition where my foot spontaneously falls asleep. It's called comatose. If you smirked even a little bit, I get credit for it. And if you rolled your eyes, I get double credit. All right. We're talking about Joe Biden pardoning his son, Hunter Biden. And my issue is not the pardon at all. My issue is the fake outrage about the pardon. One, because it's fake, and two, because it's forcing us to forget, and it's preventing us, that's the word I'm looking for, it's preventing us from recognizing the real issues that are impacting literally every American. And I'm not exaggerating, and I promise you, as I dive into the receipts, you'll see what I mean. There's predictable outrage from the opponents, right? We knew Republicans are gonna object to anything and everything. I mean, Biden could say, the sky is blue, and they would say, nope, it's orange, after their dear leader. But even Democrats, like Senator Gary Peters of Michigan and Congressman Jason Crow, 6th Congressional District of Colorado, have condemned Biden for pardoning his son. Politico, The Atlantic, The New Yorker have all piled on. And they've claimed that now Biden has opened the door to Donald Trump's abuse of the pardon power. Like, are you serious? Are you serious right now? You're telling me that the man who previously pardoned dozens of white supremacists and convicted war criminals, the man who pardoned his own family and appointed them as ambassador to France, the man who plans to pardon the January 6th insurrectionists. You're telling me now he's emboldened to abuse the pardon power? Are you kidding me? You have to be incredibly dishonest, fatally incompetent, or a combination of both to make that claim. It's ridiculous. This is the corporate media failure that I'm talking about. And it's a failure, one, because they're chasing these false comparisons between Biden and Trump, but two, because in doing so, they continue to miss the actual issues for which we need to hold Biden accountable. You see, the real issue to me is not whether Biden should have pardoned his son. That's actually irrelevant. It's what he refuses to do in the meantime for others. Because that is a failure that harms all of us in devastating ways, and we need to talk about it. You know, I've written in detail, you heard the interview from earlier, about why I reject bad faith attacks on Biden for pardoning his son Hunter. We know that whether it's Kash Patel, who's going to be the new FBI director, or whoever the hell it is, they're going to be malicious in prosecuting Biden and anybody who Biden cares about. And he's doing what he wants to do as a father to protect his children. Fine, I get it. But if we don't critique Biden's decision from the broader perspective and hold him accountable, we're doing ourselves a disservice. So what are these hypocrisies that I'm talking about? Well, one, let's talk about rules. Biden has constantly talked about how he's a traditionalist. He respects the rules, the norms, the international status quo. And this came to a head when they were trying to raise the minimum wage. As you know, the minimum wage has been $7.25 an hour since 2009. It's 15 years old. It's going to be old enough to drive pretty soon. And under Biden, he ran on the promise, the campaign promise of raising the minimum wage. Well, when they were passing the COVID relief bill, they wanted to attach a minimum wage increase bill to it. And the Senate parliamentarian, a random woman who has no elected authority whatsoever, she goes, in my opinion, you can't do that. Now, her job is simply to interpret the rules when there's some legitimate dispute. She has no actual binding authority. She's not a senator. She's not a member of Congress. She sure as hell is not the United States president. And she comes out and says, well, actually, we can't attach this bill, in my opinion. And Joe Biden said, well, hey, she said it. It's pretty authoritative. That's the rules. I'm disappointed, but that's the rules. We're not going to raise the minimum wage. Even though tens of millions of people are being exploited right now, Joe Biden said, nope, rules are rules. We're not going to raise the minimum wage. Well, there's a rule for issuing a presidential pardon. You go through the Justice Department. The Justice Department has to vet it and give their recommendation. Well, guess what? Joe Biden completely bypassed the Justice Department. Entirely forgot about them. Just pretended that they didn't even exist. Respecting the rules to let an unelected bureaucrat prevent economic relief for tens of millions of Americans, but ignoring the rules to help your son get out of a jam, that's hypocrisy. That's a glaring inconsistency. If you don't understand the urgency that people have to have a decent living wage, then what the hell are you doing? You know, studies show, and you guys know my jam is economic justice. That to me is the most important thing in the world. You want to talk about anything in the world, you got to start with economic justice. Make sure people have enough money to put food on the table. Make sure they have enough money to get the health care they need. Make sure they have enough money to have a place to live. And Joe Biden had the chance to enforce that as president, and he said, no, I'm sorry. The parliamentarian said no, so I'm going to respect the rules. You know, the studies have shown that for every dollar increase in the minimum wage, suicide rates go down 1%. Think about how many people's lives Joe Biden could have saved by saying, let me make sure you get paid enough. But nope, rules are rules, except, of course, when it comes to pardoning his son. But it doesn't stop there. Remember the 1994 crime bill? Biden's defense of the policies that harmed marginalized communities, particularly Black and Latino communities. Biden authored the 94 crime bill. He bragged about it for years and years and years. This is a crime bill that escalated mass incarceration rates, ballooned the private prison industry, devastated and decimated Black Americans. And among many lasting impacts of that racist bill is that today over 3,000 disproportionately Black and Latino people languish in federal prison for nonviolent marijuana offenses. people who remain incarcerated as a result of Joe Biden's crime bill. But when it comes to the awesome power of the presidency to pardon people, does he pardon those 3,000 for their drug offenses that harm nobody? No. He pardons his own son for drug offenses that harm nobody. I mean, come on. And I've seen zero corporate media stories address this actual hypocrisy. How are you going to use the awesome power of the presidency to pardon your son who is going to suffer the consequences of the grotesque crime bill you passed, but then not pardon the people who are suffering the consequences of the gross crime bill that you passed? Let's continue, because it doesn't stop there. My outrage at this doesn't stop there. Biden spoke at length, emotionally in his letter, about a father's duty to protect his child, especially against malicious actors. Look, a fair point. As a father myself, I felt that in my core. And for the parents listening, you know, sometimes our kids are knuckleheads. You know, sometimes you just want to, you just want to, that's that Homer Simpson choking Bart Simpson while you're little, you want to do that sometimes, but they're your kids and you love them to death regardless. And no matter what they do, you got to be their shield. You have to be. That's what a father does. That's what a mother does. And Biden talked about that look, ultimately I'm a father. This is my son. Yeah, he's made some terrible mistakes, but he's ultimately my son. And I got to protect him because they're going to come after him with the full fury of the US government. I can't let that happen. Fine. As a father, I empathize. I got it. Fair enough. Even if I disagree or somebody disagrees, they got to empathize. It's a father looking out for his son. But then inexplicably, irresponsibly, indefensibly, and simultaneously, Joe Biden knowingly sends tens of billions in offensive weapons to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, despite the UN, despite the Amnesty International, despite Human Rights Watch, despite our own State Department labeling it as either war crimes or consistent with genocide. Yeah, 2 State Department reports, damning reports in the State Department, report that Netanyahu is committing war crimes. CNN reported that after the Israel-Lebanon ceasefire that Joe Biden bragged about, Israel violated it 100 times. These are collective acts that Biden has enabled that have resulted in the preventable killing of tens of thousands of innocent children. So my question is, how does Biden reconcile these indefensible policies with his stated compassion for vulnerable children and the need to act to protect vulnerable children? Do Palestinian and Lebanese fathers and mothers not love their children the same way that Joe Biden loves his child? Do they not feel the same pain when their children are maliciously targeted and attacked by extremists with immense political power? Again, as I've said, you heard the clip earlier, I don't actually blame Biden for pardoning his son of a victimless crime, especially a crime that no prosecutor would have sought prison time had Hunter's last name been anything other than Biden. But what I vehemently object to is Biden touting respect for rules and procedure as tens of millions of Americans are denied economic justice, but forsaking the rules to help his son. I object to Biden authoring the 1994 racist crime bill that elevated the war on drugs, the devastating effects of which are felt to this day under Joe Biden's watch by thousands of Americans, but then using the awesome power of the presidency not to alleviate their suffering, but to prevent his son from suffering the consequences of Biden's own drug policies. I object to Biden citing his fatherhood instinct to protect his son from malicious harm, but then knowingly arming a right-wing extremist, even as that extremist bombs and kills tens of thousands of innocent Palestinian and Lebanese children with American weapons. That's what I object to. And if you know me, I'm not here just to complain about an issue. I'm here to provide solutions as well. So what are the solutions? Well, we have to address Biden's apathy and failure of media. Let's talk about addressing his apathy. In his final 6 weeks in office, Joe Biden can make seismic action. He can still do it. And that's the thing. He can still act. And I'm hopeful by the time you're listening to this, you're shaking your head and saying, look at Qasim, he's being ridiculous. Joe Biden's already doing all these things. What's he worried about? I hope that happens. I hope I get emails from people saying, you knucklehead, you were worried about nothing. God, that would be such a great feeling. I would love to be wrong. But my feeling is Biden's not going to do any of this stuff. But I would love to be wrong. I really would. So what can you do? Well, one, he can commute the sentences of the 40 people currently on federal death row. Last time Trump was in office, he lifted the federal moratorium and started executing people as quickly as possible. You guys have heard me talk about the death penalty before, about how, statistically speaking, at least 11%, 1 in 9 people we execute, was innocent the entire time, about how it disproportionately targets Black Americans and low-income Americans. It's not a single millionaire on death row. Can't imagine why. About how more than 50% of exonerations of living people on death row are of Black people because they're wrongfully convicted in the first place. We know the second Trump comes into office, he's going to end the federal death penalty moratorium, and he's going to have a bloodbath. Biden can save these 40 lives because we know, statistically speaking, at least 5 of them are innocent. We know that. And we know that killing people doesn't bring about justice. Biden can commute their sentences to life in prison immediately. Meanwhile, Biden has pardoned exactly 0 people on death row throughout his entire term in office. 0 people. Incredible. Second, Biden can immediately commute the sentences of the 3,000 Americans in prison for marijuana convictions, and really of anyone convicted of a federal nonviolent drug offense. Putting people in federal prison for nonviolent drug offenses is absurd. It's criminalizing addiction. You wouldn't put somebody in prison if they had a broken leg, right? You wouldn't be like, oh, you broke your leg? Well, we're putting you in jail. Addiction's a disease. It's an illness. Why the hell are we putting people in prison for an addiction? Get them into rehab, get them into therapy, get them into treatment, get them healthcare, goddammit. Like, what is wrong with you? What an insanely stupid system we have. And under Joe Biden's watch, thousands of Americans are in federal prison for nonviolent drug offenses. Pardon them, commute them. What is it but white supremacy that could disproportionately allow white Americans to become extraordinarily wealthy selling marijuana, while simultaneously disproportionately Black and Latino Americans suffer prison for using marijuana? It's modern day Jim Crow. Joe Biden can put an end to it, and he needs to. Third, Biden needs to uphold the U.S. Leahy laws and international human rights law and stop sending offensive arms to Netanyahu. As I mentioned repeatedly, not only is this the right thing to do, not only is it the legal thing to do, not only is it the moral thing to do, it's also a politically smart thing to do. We know this. 63% of Americans, 77% of Democrats want to end offensive arms to Netanyahu. Every human rights organization globally is telling us this is genocide. It's genocide. Stop arming people who are committing genocide. This is not complicated, guys. Our own State Department has issued multiple reports that these are war crimes being committed with U.S. taxpayer-funded weapons. It violates our laws. Stop enabling the mass murder of children. This is not a controversial ask. Joe Biden can do it with a swipe of a pen. Fourth, last week was the 55-year anniversary of the Chicago Police Department conducting an illegal raid of the apartment of Black Panther leader Fred Hampton. He's 21 years old. They shot 90 rounds and they killed Fred Hampton and one of his close associates. 55 years later, not a single cop has been brought to justice. They've all walked free. Meanwhile, right now, for the last 49 years, Indigenous activist Leonard Peltier, who's now 79 years old, for the last 49 years, he has languished in federal prison. Why? Because he defended himself against an illegal FBI raid and killed 2 FBI agents in self-defense. Amnesty International calls his conviction and incarceration a human rights tragedy. But I bring up Fred Hampton for a very specific reason. White supremacy is when white police can kill a black activist in an illegal raid and not go to prison. But when an indigenous activist defends himself against an illegal raid, he goes to prison. That's the reality of what we're facing right now. Joe Biden can pardon Leonard Peltier and at least give him the dignity of living his last few years as a free and public citizen. I don't think he'll do it, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to stop asking. I'm going to keep asking. I'm not going to stop asking. We have to ask. Fifth, Biden could fulfill his campaign promises to protect abortion access and cancel student debt with executive orders. Now, could these be overturned? Possibly, probably. But that's the point, right? That it's going to be overturned. So give us another couple of weeks of relief. It will advance justice. It will give women another 6 weeks to protect their health care. And it will create barriers for MAGAs. It will give them more work to do. It will slow down their attempts to install authoritarianism and fascism in the years ahead. Give me a good reason why we shouldn't give women another 6 weeks to protect their health care. Give me a good reason why we shouldn't cancel student debt. The Higher Education Act allows it. Elizabeth Warren wrote a detailed article about this. It's excellent. But let's say it's all wrong. Let's say that he can't do it. Okay. Why not force Trump to explain to 40 million Americans that he is reshackling them with $1.7 trillion in exploitative student loan debt while he absolves 815 billionaires of $2 trillion in tax cuts that they don't need? Just think about that visual. He's sitting there telling them like, "Oh, I got to cancel the student debt. You know, I got to put the student debt back in your shackle you with the student debt. And meanwhile, I'm gonna give billionaires another $2 trillion back." Imagine him arguing that. Imagine him arguing that we can't afford to cancel 1.7 trillion in student debt, but we can't afford to give 800 billionaires $2 trillion more dollars. Force him to go public with that. Why aren't we fighting for these things? Why are we complying in advance? And finally, speaking of fighting, Biden should push the boundaries of presidential immunity and force the Supreme Court to restrict him. Think about this. We know that the Supreme Court has already issued almost unlimited presidential immunity, anticipating a Trump win. So why shouldn't Biden see how far it goes? Expand the Supreme Court with executive order. Arrest political opponents. I don't know. See how far it goes. Because we know that once Trump comes into power, he is going to extend executive powers as much as possible. He's going to push the envelope of presidential immunity. He's going to be the test case. So why let Trump push the limits of presidential immunity when he will have a complicit Supreme Court to back him up? Why let Trump be the test case at all? Biden should become the test case. Biden should force the Supreme Court to keep him in check. Because when they keep him in check, then they'll define what a president can and cannot do. And then Trump will be limited to that as well. Keep yourself in check, Biden, by keeping Trump in check. That's what happens. Instead, so far, Biden has done nothing to bend the rules and to see how far his presidential immunity can go. What's the point, then, of that ruling if you're not going to test the limits of it? And the thing is, each of these acts are completely within Joe Biden's control. Every single one of them. Unlike the circus painted by corporate media, these above criticisms of Biden's inactions are legitimate criticisms. I don't care that he pardoned his son. Good, you took care of your son. Good on you, Dad. But your inactions in the rest of these cases demonstrably hurts tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of Americans. Joe Biden, you have the power to single-handedly right these wrongs. You have the power to stop arming Netanyahu. You have the power to free Leonard Peltier. You have it. This is within your control. I mean, what's stopping you? You can commute the death sentences for 40 people on death row. You can free thousands of people who are in federal prison because of your racist crime bill. You can undo that wrong. Cancel student debt and watch how much 40 million Americans will thank you for it. Protect abortion access and watch how much hundreds of millions of Americans are going to thank you for it. What are you waiting for? And the problem is that many politicians and most of legacy media won't make these criticisms because doing so would require them to confront the systemic injustice that they have not only helped enable but benefited from for generations and generations. The reality is, the bottom line is this: protecting Hunter Biden while failing to extend that same grace and justice to millions of others reveals a troubling disconnect between Biden's rhetoric and his priorities. It's a hypocrisy, and it must stop. And the thing is, it is not too late. If Joe Biden truly believes in justice for all, then he cannot stop at only protecting his son. He must, absolutely must fight to protect all Americans from malicious harm. The presidency is a powerful office, my friends, and it is not for selective compassion. It is for systemic change, and it's long past time Biden had the courage to use it, because I'll tell you what, while he has the power of the presidential pardon, if he fails to act, there is no presidential pardon comprehensive enough to excuse the injustice of inaction, because that's how he's going to be remembered. All right, you're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. When we come back from break, I want to talk about this bizarre shooting of a healthcare CEO, United Health CEO. He was shot dead. The video is, it's like something out of a John Wick movie. He just kind of walks up with a silencer, shoots them, kills them, gets on an e-bike and takes off. And they're offering like a $10,000 reward, which, I mean, come on. Really, your company is worth $500 billion, $404 billion, and that's the reward? I mean, different conversation. But we got to talk about this because there is a deep-seated hatred for the wealthy right now that I will never say justifies executing people, ever. I will say that if that outrages you, but you're silent on the 70,000 Americans a year who are killed or who die due to lack of healthcare, your priorities might just be a little bit misplaced, and your pearl clutching may not be taken so seriously. We'll dive into that in detail. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show, and if you're listening on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button because it supports our work and advocacy. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. If you're listening on Substack, make sure you hit subscribe so we can keep creating this content. There's a quote by Gene Rostand that goes, "Kill a man and you're a murderer. Kill millions of men and you are a conqueror. Kill everyone and you are a god." Headlines this week report that the CEO of United Health was killed in broad daylight by a murderer, the assailant escaping on what appeared to be an e-bike. And this shocking incident is grabbing headlines. People are wondering what happened, what's the motive. And look, I condemn killing. Can't believe I need to say that. And so everything I talk about is going to be about the broader context of this conversation, because there is a deeper, quieter violence being perpetrated by America's healthcare system that remains completely ignored. And if this murder, this cold-blooded execution of this healthcare CEO can create more awareness of it, then we need to create more awareness of it. In the wealthiest country on earth, we should have the best healthcare as well. And that's true to an extent because we have the best healthcare for the people who can afford to access it. But those who can't, tough luck. You're screwed, literally. No parent should have to watch their severely asthmatic child gasp for air because the health insurance company says, nope, we're not going to cover it. I remember this was about 7, maybe 8 years ago, a then 4-year-old who's severely asthmatic. He's almost 12 now. I was having a severe asthma attack. I was out of town. My wife took him to the doctor. The doctor said, "Oh, you have insurance that we don't take for this issue." My wife was like, "What are you talking about? You take the insurance?" It's like, "Yeah, but it doesn't cover this." And so my wife said, "Okay, well, that's insane, but fine. I'll just pay out of pocket whatever I can." We didn't have a lot of money at the time. Not that we have a lot of money now, but we didn't have enough money to even afford a doctor's visit, which is the reality for a lot of Americans. And they said, no, the insurance company has a rule that we can't take money directly if they're insuring you. So not only would they not cover us, but they wouldn't even allow us to pay because of a stupid monopoly type of contract they had. So my wife then left our doctor's office, went to an urgent care, told them that we don't have any insurance, and then paid, I think it was like several $1,000s, basically everything we had out of pocket to get him the care he needed during a life-threatening asthma attack. You know what that insurance company was? It was United Health. They wouldn't cover him. This was United Health. And unfortunately, our story is not unique. And the consequences are staggering. Look, every single developed nation on earth, more than 50 countries, have guaranteed universal health care. The US is the only one that doesn't. According to Lancet, at least 68,000 Americans die preventable deaths every single year because they are denied care or they can't afford it. That's 68,000 people, grandparents, children, loved ones, sons and daughters, aunts and uncles, lost because healthcare in America is treated like a commodity and not the basic human right that it is. Oh, well, how are we going to afford universal healthcare? Is the constant, ignorant, stupid reply I hear. And it is a stupid reply because if you don't know by now, the universal healthcare is significantly cheaper, then I'm sorry, but you're just ignorant. You're uninformed. That's what ignorant means. You are uninformed. And I need you to inform yourself because you are hurting yourself. You're hurting your family and your loved ones. A universal healthcare model, a Lancet study has proven this. Every study has proven this. Will save about $450 billion annually. Annually. Yet this violence against human life, perpetuated by corporate greed, just doesn't spark the outrage it deserves. Right now, we're disgusted at the reckless murder of the United Health CEO. But why does our disgust stop there? Where's the outrage at the fact that United Health, for example, is the worst offender in denying insurance claims? 32% denial. 1 in 3 people who give them money to then cover their healthcare expenses when they are in a life and death situation are told, go screw yourself. They're told no. The market cap for United Health, by the way, is about $460 billion. And they're telling a third of their customers, go pound sand. Where's the outrage for that? Where's the outrage at United Health killing senior citizens? This is not hyperbole. Just last year, United Health fired its intake team and implemented a faulty AI technology to process insurance claims for senior citizens. What could go wrong? This decision resulted in the AI rejecting more than 90% of claims of senior citizens. 90%. Leaving them without the critical medications that they need to survive. 90%. These are your parents. This is you. These are your grandparents. 90% denied. And guess what? People died. They died because they couldn't get the critical medication they needed because United Health decided, let's fire the people that we have working here and making thoughtful decisions and hire an AI model. Because rejecting 32% is not enough. We need to reject 90%. This is not just negligence, guys. This is malicious. This is a system designed to prioritize profits over human lives. I repeat, these are conscious decisions that directly led to deaths, and yet we rarely acknowledge that system of violence for what it is. That is violence. Killing 68,000 people so you can make a buck, that's violence. By any means, it's violence. Some of you know that my daughter has a chronic, incurable health condition that will be fatal if she doesn't get the medication she needs. She needs 6 doses a year. And you're probably thinking, oh, only 6 doses? That doesn't sound too bad. Well, each dose can only be administered in a hospital through an IV. It takes an hour and costs $40,000. And every year is a fight with the insurance company to cover her medication. Because every year they say, you know what? We don't think she needs it anymore. And I say, I'm sorry, are you her doctor? No. Are you a medical professional? No. Are you an RN? No. Do you have any medical expertise whatsoever? No. Then how are you deciding she doesn't need it anymore? Oh, well, she seemed pretty healthy over the last year. And our response is, yeah, because she's getting the medication she needs to live. And her doctors, who are the actual experts, are telling us she needs this to live and showing us the medical reports that she needs to live. Private companies know they can't make a profit off a 9-year-old girl, so they try to cancel her healthcare every year. And our daughter is fortunate to have 2 parents who are well educated and have the means to go to bat for her, but how many parents just don't have that ability? And this isn't just about my family or any one family. It's a systemic issue rooted in corporate greed. Big Pharma's grip on our healthcare has pushed millions into financial ruin, with estimates of 500,000 annual medical bankruptcies. Do you know how many medical bankruptcies exist in the other 50 countries of the world that have guaranteed universal healthcare? Zero. Zero, because they don't charge people for getting sick. They give them treatment. They make sure they have insulin, a life-saving medication that costs these companies $70 a year to produce, and they're selling it for up to $18,000 annually for Americans. This is not inflation, it's exploitation. This is not healthcare, it's horror. You know, the scientists who discovered insulin sold the patent for $1 to ensure it would remain accessible and could not be exploited. And while I give a credit to Biden for capping insulin on Medicare for, $35, that's only a fraction. That's a couple 100,000 people of the 8.4 million Americans who depend on insulin to live. It's a Band-Aid gap on a gaping wound. And that's just the story of the American healthcare system. Incremental reforms that leave millions behind while politicians enjoy taxpayer-funded universal healthcare, paid sick leave, and living wages on their third yacht. You guys, it doesn't have to be this way, right? Countries around the world have proven that universal healthcare works. It's possible, it's effective. We have the worst life expectancy of a very developed country in the world, the lowest life expectancy, the highest infant mortality, the highest maternal mortality. And look, I blame Republicans and Democrats alike. And this is not to both sides that Republicans are by far the worst offenders. They have tried hard to strip away healthcare and deregulate the healthcare system over and over again. But too many Democrats buy into this corporate greed as well. I ran it for Congress last year against a Democrat, a guy named Bill Foster, who's a scientist, who knows the data. And this is a guy who has no moral compass, shamelessly voted with Republicans 3 times to strip away the ACA, so strip away Obamacare, including strip away protections for people with pre-existing conditions. A Democrat did this. A so-called educated scientist did this. But he took that sweet healthcare big pharma money, thousands of dollars of it, and said, yeah, sure, people with pre-existing conditions, they don't need healthcare. The hell with them. I didn't win the primary in significant part because the same corporate money that convinces Bill Foster to vote against healthcare helped fund his reelection. Unless a new representative emerge who actually cares about healthcare, not personal profit. Guys, the current system isn't just broken, it's morally bankrupt. And we don't need more corporate-backed incrementalism. We need a healthcare system that actually treats healthcare as a human right, not as a commodity. And this is a fight that we have to win. It's a fight for our children, right? For the 70,000 Americans who die annually due to lack of healthcare. Just yesterday, Anthem Blue Cross and Blue Shield, or last week, they announced that people have to pay out of pocket for anesthesia if the surgery goes longer than expected. A completely arbitrary determination. Could you imagine you're in the middle of open heart surgery and the doctor comes to you, I'm sorry, your spouse is in the middle of open heart surgery, doctor comes to you and says, ma'am, sir, for us to continue the surgery, we're going to need another $10,000. We don't know why your spouse is taking so long, but, you know, we can't finish the surgery without another $10,000. Yeah, that's his heart. That's her heart sitting out there in the open. That gaping chest cavity just sitting there. We sure would love to sew it back up, but we need another $10,000 before we can do that. Blue Cross Blue Shield said this, that they're not going to pay for anesthesia if it goes longer than a specific amount of time. Mortifying. Disgusting. Let me say it again, guys. Killing CEOs is not the answer. Given that, we must confront this moral bankruptcy and recognize that 70,000 people don't have to die like this, and millions more don't have to live under this draconian, barbaric, ass-backwards, for-profit, exploitative healthcare system. We have to acknowledge that this is a broken and horrific system and end it. All right, my friends, thank you for letting me rant. Thank you for listening, and thank you for tuning in. If you're listening on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I'm deeply grateful for your ongoing support. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. We got a great show lined up for next week. My friends, I'll see you at the same time, same place, 10 a.m. on Sunday. And if you're on Substack, hit that subscribe. Until next week, peace.